Rai D. I have a question about the concept of God in Scientology. I've heard you say before in one of the lectures on your channel that Scientology doesn't have any concept of God, so day-to-day worship for the lay Scientologist takes the form of reading LRH's materials. However, on the Scientology website, they make reference to God as the supreme being, the relationship to which constitutes the eighth dynamic. It also has an LRH quotation saying that people who have some concept of a God are morally superior people. Obviously, the concept of God in Scientology is not emphasized, and from the website seems to be little more than a bit of PR to make Scientology look more like a mainstream religion. However, it does appear that LRH discussed it somewhat. Can you talk a bit about what God is in Scientology, what God means in Scientology, what LRH said about God in greater detail? Sure, and I don't know that I meant to express, if I did in an earlier talk about this, that there's no concept of God in Scientology, because that's not true. There is this thing called the eighth dynamic, and it is of the dynamics in life, starting from the individual, family, group, mankind, animals, and all life forms, matter, energy, space-time, spirits, and then the eighth dynamic, which is God or infinity, right, or the allness of all. That's the ever-expanding series of dynamics or life in Scientology. And so the eighth dynamic receives the least amount of attention in Scientology. As a religious concept, God is sort of this idea of a creator or a maker or the infinity of things. And Hubbard doesn't really say a lot about him. He does get down on the Christian concept of God in a few places. There was one thing that comes to mind immediately is a lecture he gave called Scientology and Effective Knowledge. This was, I think, in 1955 or 56. And in that lecture, he talks about people sending their prayers up to a myth, and that the whole idea of there being like some Christian God is sort of just, a construct of mankind. But he also says in other places that he never said he was an atheist, or he never said that there was no God, or anything like that. But he trounces the idea of a big, bearded guy up in heaven, sort of thing. And in fact, goes into the fact that heaven and Christian and Catholic ideas of God and angels and devils and all of that sort of thing are all the result of implants, mental implants that were done on all of us millions and millions of years ago. One is part of the whole Xenu incident, and also in other places he talks about this. He talks about a whole track, an old galactic civilization called Heliotropus, and how there were implants of heaven and implants of religious nature, put into beings, into people, and that those ideas have carried forward to present time, and that and any Scientologist who knows this material would tend to tell you that the mess, the soup of religions on this planet are a result of all of these implants and these crazy ideas that people have had that were all put there as a control mechanism, right? So that's religion. Now, that's not necessarily all there is to religion or to the idea of God. So you could sort of, split these two things apart and go, okay, there's all this craziness of religion, organized religion, and religion is a control mechanism. And then there's actually this idea of a creator or of God. And that these two things don't have to be meshed together, right? And you could have all this horrible nonsense going on with religion over here, and you could still have a creator or a God figure. And that's the part Hubbard doesn't really talk about very much in terms of how that's addressed in Scientology. I think the other term he uses is big being, the big being theory or the big being idea, right? And I think a lot of Scientologists probably have the idea that there could be some sort of a creator, or that we all came from someplace, because the Scientology cosmology tends to go back to this idea that there's some main body of theta. Okay, so if in Scientology you have a thetan, a spiritual being, you, me, everybody is a thetan, right? And there are individual spiritual beings or units of theta. And at one point, there might have been this main body of theta where we all came from, or a universe of thetans that's not this universe, that's not the physical universe, it's a different universe. Hubbard makes allusions to this. He makes, like little comments here and there, but he never really expands on those ideas anywhere. As far as I know, all the way to the top of the bridge, all the information that's in Scientology, he doesn't really expand on that concept any more than to sort of throw out the possibility that there could be a God creator type figure. But Hubbard was much more self-centered than that in terms of his philosophy. And the entire thrust of Scientology is really all about you as a spiritual being and your potentials, your capabilities, your abilities, and restoring those. And ultimately, what he said is that the eighth dynamic will not be understandable or able to be grasped in its fullest sense until a person has moved through and expanded as a being to encompass all of the earlier 7 dynamics, which includes spiritual beings, right? The 7th dynamic. So really, he kind of tabled the whole concept of God and said, yeah, it could be, there could be a creator, but it's not really what we're going to get into, and it's not really what Scientology is all about, and you're not going to really get it until you've done all of Scientology. And so that's kind of the philosophical approach he took to God. And as far as all my experience with it goes, that's pretty much everything I can say about Hubbard's stated expression of a God figure.